Praise the Lord, church. Today we are going to look on the topic wisdom. And wisdom is the ability to know and apply spiritual truths. And our text is from 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1 to 14. Please let us read together. The book of 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1 to 14. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord, and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places. However, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Today we are going to look on wisdom. And to begin with, I have said that wisdom is the ability to know and apply spiritual truths. The first thing is to know the knowledge of the truth. And the second thing is to apply that truth in your life. So wisdom is the ability to know and apply spiritual truths. Then, to begin with, we are going to look at the broad context of the book of 1 Kings, and then we'll proceed to the immediate, or the context that precedes Solomon's request for wisdom. The big issue in the book of 1 Kings concerns worship. And from King Solomon till exile to Babylon, we can see kings clashing with the prophets of Yahweh regarding their idolatrous behavior. And so the big issue here concerns worship. And therefore, we see God coming in to prove himself to be the true God who should be worshipped. In that time, they built a temple of Baal. And in the temple of Baal, they placed the god of fertility. And this was the god who they believed was the provider of rains. And so Elijah comes in and he speaks to King Ahab and he tells him that there shall be no rains except by my word. And remember, Elijah was speaking on behalf of God. And so here God was coming in to show that he is suffering over the idols of Baal and Asherah. And so, according to the word of Elijah, there was no rains until by his word. And so, this is the time when Elijah fled to the brook where he was fed by ravens. That was great, to be fed by ravens. And when the brook dried up, he was sent by God to Sidon. And in this territory, Baal worship was very high. And Elijah is sent to a widow. Very unlikely person to provide. Remember, God is showing himself sovereign over Baal. And so, God provides to Elijah all that time, and he provides to the widow, and later he resurrected the child of the widow. And so, God proved himself to be God among the people of Sidon. Then we know about the context at Mount Carmel, 850 pagan prophets against one prophet of God. That is Elijah. And we know the story, what happened. We know about the prayers of those pagan prophets, how they tormented themselves, yet without any response from their God. But Elijah, very organized, very simple in his prayer, he presents his request to God, and God answered by prayer. And it is during that time when also the rains fell. It's during that time when Elijah, by his word, there was great rains. And in all this, God was showing himself to be sovereign. So that is the broad idea of the book. The big struggle of the book. The worship of idols and the worship of true God. Then the book begins with David in his old age, whereby he is not able to get warmth, and Abishag, a very beautiful lady, is brought, but the king doesn't get any warmth. That meant that his days were gone. And so, after that, we see Adonijah, who is described like Joab, not Joab, like Absalom, like Saul. You know the characters of these guys. Amnon, people were very high in their glands, but low in their brains and constrained. And so that's no wonder Adonijah later asked for his father's concubine, something that was very disgraceful. And so this is the context where Solomon asked for wisdom. Secondly, after Adonijah is silenced, we see David coming in, and he gives Solomon instruction on what to do with his enemies, who is Joab and Shimei. And so, he is given the first duty. When you get to power, please, this is your first duty. Something that was very traumatizing, something that was very hard to Solomon. Imagine you are given power and your first duty is to do away with your father's enemies. And you know that words from a dying person are very powerful. And so, here is Solomon. And we can see in all this, Solomon exercised wisdom. One, when he got into power, he didn't go and pick Joab and Shimei and just execute them. He just waited for them to prove themselves guilty. And so, this is the context in which Solomon is asked by God to request for what he wants. And he chooses the right thing to be given by God. And because our topic today is wisdom, we are going to mention on what Solomon was able to achieve or to accomplish through the wisdom that God gave him. Remember, he's going to lead very stubborn people, very rebellious Jews, very wicked, he himself being one of them. Because we can see from chapter 3, the chapter begins by telling us that Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. This was against the law of God. And here is the offer from God. Ask what you want. And so, he asked for wisdom. And because our topic today is wisdom, we are not going to measure on his mistakes, because even with the wisdom of God, he was able to make mistakes. So let this one be very clear to us, that wisdom does not stop us from sinning against God. Number one, we can see wisdom in Solomon even before he asked for it. Remember, his father said to him, "You are wise. Just know what to do with my enemies," who is Joab and Shimei. And so we can sense wisdom in Solomon in the way he acted to his enemies. The same way I have said, he did not just pick his enemies and execute them. He waited for them to prove themselves guilty. Can you imagine he just got into power and he picked Shimei and Joab and killed them? That would bring chaos in Israel. People would not understand him. But he was wise to give them grace period for them to, maybe he gave them grace period to see whether they would change. But they never changed. Because we know after Joab heard that Abiathar, who was the priest who conferred with Adonijah against him, when he heard of it, he fled away. Someone cannot run away when he is not guilty. And so, through the action of Joab, he proved himself guilty, and Solomon executed him. Then we see Shimei. Shimei is the guy who cast David. And so, Shimei is given another grace period. He is told, "You know what? This is what you did to my dad. But one thing, one covenant I'm going to make with you. Please don't leave Jerusalem." And it came a time when his slaves ran away, and Shimei followed after them. And because of that, Solomon executed them. So we can sense wisdom in Solomon even before God gave it to him. Secondly, we can sense wisdom in Solomon in his request. When he's asked to ask for whatever he wants from God, he didn't just wake up and say, "This is what I want, this is what I want." But first, he begins by acknowledging that prayer depends on God's fidelity. And that is why he's saying that this is what God you have done, and because of this, because you are faithful, I know that you are going to do it to me, whatever I'm going to ask from you. And there is a big lesson here, that prayer doesn't depend on our faithfulness. God does not answer our prayers because we have done something. It is because he himself remains to be faithful and we are unfaithful. And so Solomon begins by acknowledging God's fidelity. And we can sense wisdom in his request again. He doesn't begin by saying, "God," I think if Solomon was a Kenyan, he would begin by asking for security and all that. But he did not begin with that. He's not concerned about himself. And that's why he is asking for wisdom, to know how to govern these people, to know how to deal with these stubborn people. And so he asked for wisdom. And this shows us what possessed Solomon. You know, what possesses someone is what he would say. If your desire is to get that V8, you would present that request to God. But the desire of Solomon was not that one. His desire was to see the kingdom of Israel thrive under his hands. And so he requests for wisdom. And this showed who was Solomon. You know one thing with people, if you want to know your son, just ask them what they want. And you can detect a lot of what they are in their requests. And so, Solomon is very wise in his request, before God. Our leaders today, if they ask to ask anything from God, they would ask for that position. This is not the case with Solomon. Even when Adonijah, his brother, arose against him, he never seemed to bother about it. The person who bothered about it is Nathan, the prophet of God. And no wonder his request. When he's given power, he doesn't take it like something to brag on or something to boast about. He takes it as a challenge before him. How am I going to lead these people? He did not ask for riches and honor, but God gave this surplus to him. And he is given another surplus that if you obey my covenant, if you keep my statutes, I am going to give you long life. I think this is not the way Kenyans would pray. They would first ask for that power, they would first ask for that honor and long life so that they can oppress us for many days. So, the Bible says the prayer of Solomon pleased the Lord. Do your prayers please the Lord? And bear me witness. If your prayers please the Lord, you will get even more than you ask. The Lord knows what you want. And if your attitude in prayer is good, the Lord will provide for you. So, we can see wisdom in the request of Solomon. Now, Solomon is given the wisdom officially. And his first case that was brought before him is between two prostitutes, sinful people. He did not send them away. And Solomon was the Chief Justice. Can you imagine if Uhuru is the Chief Justice today? Would we get justice? I think Solomon, this issue was settled in the lower positions, but it is now brought to Solomon to settle it. I think this story has become very common to us, such that we think if we were Solomon, we would have done the same. But our learned friends can prove you wrong. No wonder the many cases in the court that are not settled today. Because people don't have the wisdom of God. They don't want to give justice. But can you imagine, in a matter of, I think less than 5 minutes, this case was able to be settled. Do you know why we have so many cases in the court today? Because people don't want to give justice. If our judges could be Christians and true-born Christians, we could not have so many cases in the court today. And so, here, Solomon doesn't send these prostitutes away. Can you imagine if you are Solomon? You would think, why should these very dirty people come to me to give them justice? And this shows us that even those who don't believe in God, they love justice. And we are not obligated, we as Christians, to serve the Christians alone. Even non-Christians need our service. And so, Solomon exercised wisdom in this case. Then, fourthly, we can sense wisdom in the way Solomon organized his administration. In chapter 4, verse 1 to 19, we see two lists. One, the one that contained cabinet ministers, 11 of them. Then number 2, the governors. Can you imagine 11 cabinet ministers? How many do we have in Kenya? And 12 governors. And they were able to manage the whole country. Very large country. What does this teach us today? Even few leaders can lead and give the best. It's not about creating new positions for greed purposes of our leaders. It's about their integrity. And so, through the wisdom of God in Solomon, he was able to manage this country with these few. And in his cabinet, we have 4 priests. And his personal advisor is a priest. What does this teach us today? If a nation is going to thrive, 1, it must hear from God. Do our leaders listen to the voice of the church today? Then, number 5, through the wisdom of Solomon, God's promises are fulfilled. From chapter 4, verse 20 to 28. These were the promises that were meant to Abraham. And through his wise leadership, they are fulfilled. One is to do with people. Abraham was promised so many people, like the sand in the seashore. Then about the land. And the Bible confirms this in Genesis chapter 22, verse 17, in Genesis chapter 15, verse 18 to 21, and in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 10 to 11. About people, so many of them, about land, even governing to Egypt. Then the third thing is peace. Through wise leader, a nation is at peace. Do we have wise leaders today? Because for sure, if we had them, we would not be suffering like we are. So, through the wisdom that God gave to Solomon, he was able to bring this to fulfillment. That people will be many, they will rule over the land, and there would be peace. Then number 6, we can see the writer of the book in chapter 4, verse 29 to 34, verse 32 to 33, the writer of the book says that there was no any other person wise like Solomon. He studied from plants to animals. He wrote 3,000 proverbs, 105 songs. And the writer of the book acknowledges that this wisdom was because God gave it to him. What does this teach us today? That all wisdom comes from God. Be it in the science, be it in humanities, everywhere. All wisdom, all knowledge is from God. And that's why you as a Christian, you should not brag about your abilities. It is God-given. You should not look down on others because they don't have the abilities that you have. The Bible confirms to us that this wisdom, this knowledge was from God. You know, Solomon studied plants. You have studied mathematics alone, and you are bragging. Solomon studied everything. And I hope he didn't brag about it. Then the wisdom of Solomon can be seen in the house plans and in the report that is recorded in chapter 5 and chapter 6. We can see the wisdom that God gave to Solomon in these chapters. 1, these chapters are very detailed. I think so many people don't like to read these chapters. They just recommend them to quantity surveyors and contractors and people like those. But these chapters were not written in vain. And I agree with Paul when he says, all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, correcting, and rebuking. And it's because of these chapters that archaeologists today can confirm that the Bible is true. In their excavations, they have found a reliable source of information in these books. And they can confirm what is written in the Bible is true about the construction, about the decoration of the temple and the king's palace, using these details. And in the cabinet of Solomon, we have secretaries. And I think these are the secretaries who wrote this down, who kept this information in book. And so, this information is detailed, yet organized. Only through the wisdom that God gave him, he was able to record this information. Then, our question today is, do we need wisdom? And in what aspect or in what field do we need wisdom? And I would tell you, we need wisdom in every aspect of our lives. In our relationship with God and with fellow human beings. Be it in your work, be it in church setup, in any organization that you are in, you need the wisdom of God. One, to be able to make wise decisions, and two, to please God. Then, if you lack wisdom, what should you do? And the book of James chapter 1 verse 5 to 8 asks the answer of that question. If you lack wisdom, ask it from God. And God is so generous, he cannot deny it from you. But in your asking, ask with faith. Because if you ask without faith, you are like a wave in the sea that is tossed here and there. And such person should not expect anything from God. So, if you lack wisdom in whatever you do, if you lack wisdom in your relationship with people, if you lack wisdom in the way you handle the things of God, ask it from God and you will receive it. Then, this is not to say that with the wisdom of God in your life, you are not going to sin. You know, one mistake that Christians make when they hear about their fellow Christians' sinful nature is that they think that when you become a Christian, you don't sin and you are free from sin. Yes, you are free from sin because the sin does not dominate you. But you are vulnerable to sin and you sin every day. And a Christian, a true bona fide Christian, is the one who recognizes every day, I need Christ. Every day you realize how sinful you are and how God is righteous. And through that, you learn to depend on God. So, the most important thing for you is to mend your relationship with God. If you are not born again, it's very hard for you to exercise wisdom. So, if you are not a Christian, if you are not a true Christian, put your faith in God. Put your faith in Jesus Christ. Don't depend on your own merits. You cannot make it by your own. Only through the grace of God that you can make it. And that marks the end of our sermon. Thank you so much.
Praise the church. Amen. Let's receive our today's